Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about being selective with your primary assistance work. And a lot of times, you get people who will say, well, Jason, I don't know what my weak links are. And that's okay, right? Because when you're dealing with the hypertrophy end, that's when you need to know these things the most. In other words, knowing if it's your pecs versus your triceps causing you a problem on the bench, it's going to impact how much tricep versus pec work you do. We get all that. But when it comes to looking at the movements themselves, we can see where we stick on an exercise. And so when we're picking usually our biggest supplemental lift, we get a real good idea of what's going on. In other words, if you just film your lifts, you know where your bench sticks or slows. You know where your deadlift sticks or slows, right? This isn't a difficult concept. If the bar stops 2 to 3 inches off your chest on the bench, you know you're weak off the chest. If it stops in the very middle somewhere, you know you're weak in the middle. If you grind the last 3 inches of the lockout and struggle with it for a second and a half, you know your lockout is weak. Okay? This doesn't require you to be able to analyze specific muscles. So why does this matter? Well, it matters if we're going to pick a big supplemental press, because if we're going to do hypertrophy training for our bench, pecs, triceps, delts, upper back, all that stuff, we're still probably going to have a big supplemental lift that we use. And you see me in this particular video doing what? Angled grip Swiss bar against chains. You see me doing some pen benching very close to the chest. Well, these are both good for kind of sticking in the mid-range, although we could argue the pen press is closer to the chest because I'm pressing about 1 inch off the chest. So if you're failing close to off the chest, that's a real good choice, isn't it? But you could also raise it a little bit and it'd be great for the mid-range. Now, people will say, well, what about the chains? Chains or lockout? Not necessarily. Lighter chains really aren't. The bar slows towards the middle, and then you lock fairly slow. Training with chains is a good supplemental lift, right? You could do any benching with chains. It doesn't have to be that specific bar. We could argue that specific bar is a little more tricep dominant. All right, so if you need more triceps, you could do that bar. But just benching against chains or against bands, lighter ones. Right? It's not like with speed work where we're running 25 or 30% of our max. In that case, you just see me using 30 pounds of chains. Right? That's light. 30 pounds is not heavy. 30 pounds of bands isn't heavy. 50, 60, 70, 100 pounds would be. 30 pounds isn't heavy. It'll help speed you up through the mid-range a little bit. Right? That's a good supplemental lift. All right? And then, of course, you see me doing some tricep work. But how about if your triceps seem to be weak? If you struggle with the lockout, that's still a good choice, though, right? Because of that specific bar uses more tricep. It de-emphasizes the delts a little. Puts a little more work on the tricep, safer on the shoulders, and then you have chains on top of it. Okay? See where we're going with this? It's a very good bar for triceps. And then if you do a JM press, which you see me doing a JM press with a football bar in some of these clips in the background, because this is all from the same training week. That combination, very, very good for triceps. So if you're weak on triceps with your lockout, this combination works well. Now, triceps are not always guaranteed to be lockout weakness, right? There are other forms of lockout weakness, but aren't we addressing that to some extent anyways? In other words, we don't need to know whether it's pecs or triceps that are causing an issue when you throw chains or bands on, do we? Right? It doesn't matter because they're both going to get hit through that position. So you can pick movements that hit those positions. And that's the point I'm going to with it. So you could do the same thing with your deadlifting. Right? You could do the same thing with your deadlifting. I'm not saying you necessarily need to do a partial deadlift of any type. But you could look at where it's at in the movement. Look at where it's at in the movement. If you stick below the knee on a deadlift, what do we mean below the knee? Below the knee, not right off the floor. All right, off the floor means you break the weight a couple inches off the floor and it just stops. Now, people will again go, well, I don't know how far it's off the floor. Well, why aren't you filming? All of these problems can be solved by just filming yourself. Well, figure out how many inches you're sticking off the floor. So what happens if you stick just below the knee? Well, you could do a Romanian deadlift from that position, or just a little bit deeper. You could do pause deadlifts. What about if we want to go to a non-deadlift? How about a good morning? Yeah, good mornings are great. Narrow stance good mornings. If you look at the moment arbs involved, any sort of narrow stance good morning will help you if that's your sticking point. Arguably, certain bars will help more off the floor than others, but if you stick below the knee, any narrow stance good morning is going to help. What about if you struggle with the lockout? What sort of good morning might you think about? Well, what muscles affect the lockout? Glutes or upper back. You got to figure out which one it is, but you could film yourself. But you could do any wide stance good morning. Throw that in with a safety bar, and you're guaranteed to handle both of them. In other words, if you don't know which muscles are causing it completely, but you know that you struggle with the lockout on a conventional deadlift, you could do safety bar with a wide stance. Now you've killed two birds with one stone. Okay, you can pick a supplemental lift without always knowing which muscles, because sometimes there's more than one muscle and we can't pin it down. If you don't have a trained eye, you can't always pin it down, but you can see where it's at in the movement, and you can look for supplemental lifts that impact that part of the movement the most. Okay, and that's again perfect examples. Perfect examples. You stick below the knee on a deadlift, conventional. Pause deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, narrow stance good mornings of any type. Struggling with that lockout when you can't figure out whether it's upper back or glutes, we'll do a safety bar with a wide stance. You cover both. Maybe do some more upper back work anyways. Okay. So those are all examples of what you can use as a primary supplemental exercise, right? You can use it as a primary supplemental exercise. Okay, you don't have to always know which muscles are limiting you if you can at least see where your problems are in the movement pattern. And then when you pick your biggest accessory lift, you can pick one for that particular week or block or training session that addresses that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.